name's Gabby. I'm the head of partnerships at Live. We represent the entirety of the UK's live music sector to government, the public and the wider industry, representing thousands of businesses, artists and backstage workers. So this is quite a relevant one for us. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white female with brown eyes, blonde tied back hair, and I'm wearing a brown jumper with gold rimmed glasses. The Live Talks programme, it's a series of free monthly online sessions, which we have a focus on equality, diversity, inclusion, sustainability and well-being. They're available to absolutely everybody. You don't have to be a member of Live. We're very lucky to have our amazing partners of the programme to enable us to keep the programme running for free. So please do spread the word. They happen every single month. Before I hand over to Jeordie and Jade, I just need to go through a quick bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's sessions to share online for those unable to join. If you would rather remain anonymous, please feel free to keep your camera turned off and change your Zoom name to anonymous. Please make sure your mic is muted throughout to avoid interference. If we have some time left at the end, we'll open up the floor to questions, but please also feel free to put any questions you have into the chat. I'll kind of monitor that and let Jeordie and Jade know as they come in. And yes, a recording of today's session will be made available via the Live website, which I'll put a link into the chat in a bit. And that's it from me. So welcome everyone, and over to you, Jeordie and Jade.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Yes, so I'm Jeordie, my pronouns are they, them, and to describe myself, I am white, I've got long brown curly hair, always wearing black. So today I'm wearing a black Tonic Rider t-shirt, which is a white logo with a red target.
And I'm Jade. I'm a white female, pronouns are she, her. I've got dark curly hair, blue eyes, and I'm also wearing black.
We always do, don't we? We're always wearing black. I've noticed that. Okay, brilliant. So now we'll share the slides. Okay, so before we begin, can everyone see them slides? Is that all good? Excellent. Okay. So yes, so Jade and I are from Tonic Rider, and today we are presenting a presentation on post-festival season peer support for artists and backstage workers. And we recognise that festival season, as we're now over festival season, that for some of you may have worked at multiple festivals, 10, 20 festivals, but for some people it might even been just working at one festival, but that can actually be for a whole weekend or even for a whole week. So we recognise the differences in terms of festival season, the effects it has on mental health, and then also the effects it has after festival season. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We always highlight about what is mental health to begin with, so you may have seen us talk about that before, and then towards the end we will talk about the programme. Another additional bit about this is we do also have an anonymous question link. So the link here, tonicmusic.co.uk/question. If you type that in to your address bar, you will be able to, it will take you to a form and you'll be able to submit a question if you don't feel comfortable talking about it publicly, or there's a certain topic you just want to keep a little bit more anonymous. If we don't have time at the end to answer all of those, we can send an email to Gabby and the Live team and then share that out in terms of the answers. And this link will be present throughout the presentation at the bottom left corner. So who we are. So we are Tonic Music for Mental Health. So Tonic Music for Mental Health is a registered charity established in 2012. Originally, it was founded in Portsmouth with the aim of providing recovery through music programs. So this is providing music workshops for the general public experiencing poor mental health or mental ill health, using music as a recovery tool. So this included bass workshops, vocal workshops, ska choirs. And since then, we've expanded to recently launch our Never Mind the Stigma program, which is a suicide prevention program for music fans that is really going to start going more national next year. But today we'll be focusing on the Tonic Rider program with the aim of promoting good mental health in the music industry. So we have two speakers here today. So as mentioned, we've got Jade Hughes, who is our Tonic Rider training support and safeguarding lead. And I'm Jeordie Shenton. I'm the coordinator of the Tonic Rider program. And both Jade and I have been working on the program since its beginning over 2.5 years ago now. Another little bit about us, which is relevant to this talk, is Tonic itself has been working festival season. So we do pause our program to go and work at festivals. So this year we've worked at Nibley Festival, which is in Gloucestershire, and this was offering backstage support for artists and crew and also providing a information stand to attendees. We also worked at Boomtown Fair, so we were providing volunteers for the festival, and for Boomtown we were there for a whole week. So that was the one that was slightly different in terms of the way we worked. We also worked at Victoria's Festival, again providing backstage support and then never mind the stigma stand for attendees, and our patron Barry Ashworth's festival, Mucky Weekender. And here you can see what we do at festivals in terms of backstage support. So if you are working at festivals next year, come and say hello to us. We usually position in green rooms or in the more sort of shared areas where we offer information and support to artists, crew, and anyone working at the festival all through the working days of the festival. And we have our mental health scenes. We also have our Tonic Rider boxes. So these are physical boxes with information about the program and also a selection of zines. And this is also now a digital version. So we do offer a QR code at events where you can bleep it on your phone and it takes you to a festival-specific digital box. So first, we are going to talk about what is mental health.
So mental health is just like physical health. It's something that we all do have. And we can look at mental health as something that is fluid, like physical health, and something that can change over time. So our mental health can be influenced by what is currently going on for us in our lives, as well as our past experiences, our risk factors, so for example, stress, as well as our protective factors, so our positive relationships and how it is that we look after ourselves. So this chart here, if you can get that for me, Jeordie, there, you'll see shows us how a person with a diagnosed mental illness can have positive mental health, and a person with no diagnosis can have poor mental health. So it's not just the case of having or not having a diagnosis of a mental health disorder or of situations staying the same. So what is anxiety? So we all experience anxiety, and anxiety is a natural response to particular situations. And although we all experience anxiety, we all do so differently. And for some of us, it may feel like butterflies in the stomach, but for others, it may be more severe, such as shortness of breath or severe nausea, for example. With this kind of anxiety, which is more situational, once this anxiety-provoking situation has passed, the anxiety will eventually subside. Now, an anxiety disorder is different. So we don't all experience an anxiety disorder, even though it is a common mental health condition. Someone diagnosed with an anxiety disorder will experience severe and enduring anxiety that will affect their daily life. And what is depression? So, like anxiety, we will all experience low mood, but that's not the same as depression. So low mood will tend to lift after a few days, whereas depression is persistent, sad or low mood, lasting for at least 2 weeks. Someone diagnosed with depression will usually present with an unusually sad mood that won't go away. And they will often lose interest in things that they used to enjoy and experience physical symptoms such as a lack of energy or sleeping too much, too little, or overeating, or a loss of appetite. And on to burnout. So mental and physical exhaustion due to being overworked or being unable to take a break after being on tour, financial stress and poor work-life balance can eventually lead to burnout. And the World Health Organization definition of burnout is feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, negative feelings, cynicism, or increased distance from your job, and reduced professional efficacy. Some of the signs and symptoms that you may be experiencing burnout are that you feeling extremely stressed. You may have creative blocks, lack of motivation. You may feel incredibly overwhelmed. You might start to experience feelings of imposter syndrome, procrastination, heightened emotions, which can also be irritability, and a sense of feeling vulnerable. And a desire, you may have an overwhelming desire to quit your job. Now, there's some things that you can do to help reduce burnout. The first thing you want to think about looking at is looking after your physical health. So where energy is depleted from burnout, prioritizing healthy eating, sleep and exercise will all help to improve your energy levels, which is going to have a physical and mental positive impact. You may need to put some boundaries in place. So you may need to look at your workload and have, very realistic about what you can and can't commit to. And that might mean saying no to some other opportunities that you maybe can't fit into your schedule. And make time for yourself. So it's really important to set time aside to do something that you enjoy that doesn't involve work. So even if you want to think about spending even at least 30 minutes a day, just doing something for yourself, a self-care activity, and building on that. And reignite your passion. So remind yourself why you started your career in the first place and try to find that passion again. Connect with others. So speak to someone that you trust, and you may want to speak to somebody in particular who's shared similar experiences to you. And lastly, take one day at a time. So burnout can make the future look bleak and overwhelming. So just think about getting through each day as it comes.
Now, in terms of research, there's not been much research in terms of burnout in the music industry. Now, we do know that burnout is quite prevalent, but there's been a lack of research on it. However, there has been a significant amount of research specifically on anxiety and depression in relation to musicians, crew, and other personnel working in the music industry. So some research I've been part of found that in terms of personal experiences, between 27% and 72% of all music professionals experience anxiety at some point. And with depression, this is between 27% and 88%. However, when we look at formal diagnoses, we find that anxiety is between 17% and 40%, and depression is 23%, 36%. So what we recognise here is that in post-festival season, particularly where there's experiences of anxiety and depression, that there is an underdiagnosis clinically of anxiety and depression. So we would expect, looking at these two figures, that the anxiety and depression would be a little bit higher in terms of diagnosis. So this would suggest that there's an underdiagnosis, and this is possibly due to music professionals not being able to visit their GP whilst being on tour, working festival season, or even upon returning, maybe even not being registered with a GP. So it is an important area to highlight. And it's important because when looking at these statistics, for anxiety, for every one person in the general population with anxiety, there are 4 in the music industry. And with depression, for every one person with depression, there are 2 in the music industry. So we know there are mental health concerns within the music industry. The research suggests this, and it also suggests that there would be an underdiagnosis. And when we look at stresses, so when we look at what particular stresses are within the music industry, we have a number here. So at the top, you've got more that are musician specific, and towards the bottom, more that may be relevant to backstage workers. So performance anxiety is a key stressor for musicians. The anxieties and worries about going on stage, performing live, performing in the studio. Creative blocks, which, as Jade mentioned, can actually be a symptom of burnout in terms of not being able to write songs, not being able to compose pieces of music, and that can be a real significant stressor for musicians. For those who achieve fame, there may be pressures associated with fame in terms of being known in the public eye, and also imposter syndrome, like not believing your own ability in terms of where you are at and the amount of recognition you receive. Body image is a particular stressor in the music industry, particularly around sort of facial appearance, particularly around sort of maybe body size. And this again is pretty significant with musicians, particularly those who perform in front of cameras and also at front of the stage. Negative feedback. So in the music industry, this is something artists and crew experience regularly. This can be negative feedback from bosses, from managers. This can be from audiences. This can be from media, or this can be from even record labels. So this can be related to reviews not only of albums but also of festivals. So for people running festivals, if the festival receives a negative review, that can have a real big impact, especially post-festival season. Just finished a festival and then it's being slated within the media. Massive impact that we don't recognise. Digital burnout for a lot of people working festivals, whether it's artists or again crew, people organise festival, having to be on social media, having to promote, and again this can become quite tiring. It's like having almost like a work boss in your back pocket. Your phone's always bleeping, going off, and always having to use it to do things. Band and crew conflicts are particularly stressful. At festival season, we'll work in tight-knit groups. So it'll be bands, or it'll be sort of roadie crews, and if there's difficulties in those relationships, and that's quite for long term, like working at days, sometimes in weeks and months at a time, this can be very, very difficult and lead to a lot of stress and poor mental health. And we know that working at festivals is very much a 24/7 culture. There is a lack of sleep. There is a lack of access to rest. It is very much music going on throughout the day, throughout the night, things going on, because it's not like even when, say, the music finishes at midnight and people go back to the tents, that things don't stop. Incidents still happen. And with that physical injury, so working at festival involves a lot of heavy loading, a lot of movement, a lot of walking about, and actually walking about on surfaces that can be uneven as well. So there's a high risk of physical injury and a lot of wear and tear of the body. And then, of course, in terms of the music industry generally, there is job insecurity, there is financial strain, especially for freelancers having to find work, next job opportunities. So that can be difficult in terms of burnout. It makes it much harder, as Jade said, to say no to job opportunities when the industry is so precarious. And then we also see a lack of recognition. And we see that in terms of artists, in terms of lack of recognition from their families, in terms of their job. But again, backstage workers, when they're working at festivals, this can be seen as sometimes not really as a real job by others because there's a lack of understanding. And then finally, we have abuse and discrimination. And particularly this relates to band and crew conflicts, where it can be even more difficult to get away from abuse and discrimination when at festivals where it's so close-knit. Overlaying with that are always our personal stresses. So stresses that we have going in our personal lives, or those that we bring before working in the music industry. And these relate to identity, these relate to relationships, trauma, life stressors, general life stressors, and mental health. And actually, you'll see later about how these impact upon us post-festival season, and particularly about identity, relationships, and general life stresses. But then when it comes to festival season, when it comes to festival workers, there's an extra overlay of festival season itself. And we can see in this diagram here that festival season not only has its own unique stresses, but it exacerbates the pre-existing music industry stresses and personal stresses. So it can make relationships much more difficult. It can make 24/7 culture much more worse. And examples of the unique stresses that festival season bring are a lack of autonomy. So working at festivals, it can be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to leave a festival site. So you're not in control of your daily routine. You're more sort of scheduled in terms of when you may eat, in terms of catering, when you can sleep. You don't really have much area to say, I'm going to take 20 minutes out and do this. It can be very, very difficult. And with that comes cramped living. So for a lot of festival workers or for artists and crew working on tour buses, there is sleeping near one another and sharing living arrangements, which can be very difficult, lack of privacy, and also when there is difficulties with crew and band conflicts, that could be even worse. Leaving family. So working at festivals, even for a single festival, can be up to a week, 10 days at a time. At multiple festivals, this can be 3, 4, even 6 months at a time. And that means leaving family and friends for an extended period. And then finally, and this can seem trivial, but with everything that's going on in terms of global warming and the climate, there is instances of extreme weather. And working at festivals, particularly working outside, you are working in terms of extreme heat, above 30 degrees. There can be much heavier rainfall, extreme downpour, leading to muddy surfaces, and then also strong winds, which can actually be really difficult to work in, where you've got a lot of seasonal aspects, even just in one weekend of a festival. And we don't often consider the impact of weather on our bodies, on ourselves, and particularly extreme changes of weather, particularly being quite wet and damp through rain, and then also as well in terms of breathing when it comes to heavy winds. So these are stresses festival season, but then we should consider post-festival season and what may be going on for artists and backstage workers at present in terms of stresses. So there's different types. So we can have financial stresses post-festival season. For many, festival season can actually mean regular work, especially working at multiple festivals. Returning from festival season, there may be less opportunities, and with that leads to job precarity. Where is the next work going to come in? Where is my next paycheck going to come in? We also have social stresses. And for some, and this will be discussed a little bit later on, festival season is an area of real high socialization, a lot of socializing going on, talking to touring families, festival families, and the adjustment can be really difficult in terms of social stress. And with that, the emotional stress. Festival season can be a very sort of key time of emotional turbulence. And sometimes it can be very difficult to process all the things that go on. So there may be incidents that may happen. There may be cases of extreme stress. And it's not until post-festival season that these become reality and it's a time for reflection. So it can be a real emotional burden. Identity. For a lot of people, there's sort of differences in identity between festival season and then post-festival season, which we'll discuss a little bit more later. But actually, festival season can give a lot of people that sort of a truer sense of identity, that they feel more worth in themselves, they feel they know who they are, and then coming back from festival season, back to everyday normal life, that they can feel a little bit of loss with that. Personal stresses. Festival season can be really interesting in terms of, for some, personal stresses can be put on the back burner. So stresses linked to general everyday life stresses, for example, the washing machine breaking, or for example, problems with the house, they can be put towards the back while working at festival season. So then when returning home, these stresses can tend to happen. For a lot of people, this can be the most trivial things, such as suddenly the heating's not working because it's not been on for a significant period of time. Cognitive stresses. Something that's not discussed enough is the impact in our festival season on our cognition. Again, this relates to burnout, but it's not just physically demanding festival season, but also cognitively demanding. Having to constantly work in different roles, think on your feet. If bands suddenly don't turn up without having to think how to rearrange schedules, if equipment is damaged, if things happen. And again, with more and more things like extreme weather closing festivals, there's been all manner of things where what is planned in terms of the itinerary is never what happens. And that can be real cognitively demanding. And like emotional stresses, it's not until returning back home that these suddenly all then are present within the body. Physical stresses, as mentioned, and again, it's not just a case of the sort of physical stresses during festival season, but again, post-festival season is when it begins to catch up with you. We've all heard about post-festival season flu and then returning from long periods of work and suddenly feeling a bit poorly. This is the body readjusting to what's happening. And then occupational stresses. So in terms of occupation, For some, particularly when having wash-up meetings about festival season or particular festivals, the actual issues that occur during the festival are not discussed and then sort of relived until post-festival season. So actually returning from festivals can be about reliving what went wrong, even what went good, but this can be a difficult time, and then considering future festivals, what will happen. Particularly as well, when looking at physical stresses and then also cognitive stresses, we use the term post-festival season recovery, and this can relate to poor nutrition. So working at festivals, sometimes there can be poor nutrition in terms of access to a range of foods, fruit and vegetables, a more balanced diet, not eating on the go. So it can be a time where the body's adjusting in terms of nutrition, muscular exertion. So this can then lead to arthritis. This can also lead to physical injuries where your body's recovering. Sleep deprivation, real key thing. Very difficult to sleep at festivals, very difficult to sleep in cramped conditions. So your body starts catching up with all that lack of sleep. Prolonged stress. So again, working at festival, things happening all the time, that stress catches up with you upon return. And then sensory overload, another aspect that's not considered enough. Working at festivals, there's a lot of light, there's a lot of sound, there's a lot of different conditions, weather conditions again. And again, your body gets sort of overloaded by this, and it can be very difficult for the body to recover, especially in terms of sort of visual with lights and in terms of hearing with noise. And it's really important that we always make sure that we check, have visual tests and also hearing tests because of working at festivals. And then in the emotional aspect, we have post-festival season blues. For some, this is sometimes talked about in terms of fans when they've done festivals and how they get the blues, but also in terms of working at festivals. So we can see that upon returning home, there's feelings of isolation. There's a real big change in terms of relationships and responsibilities, feelings of displacement, feelings of alienation. So kind of feeling quite distant from what has happened before, a feeling of loss. And that's a really important thing. It can sound quite strange, but festival season's over, it doesn't happen again for a few months, and there can sort of be that adjustment of feeling that gets lost. And boredom. A lot of people work at festivals, there's a lot of things going on. It can be a great arena to work in. And that means that for some, there's never boredom at festivals, but that means upon returning home, it can be very difficult to kind of readjust and decide what to do to address any elements of boredom. And in a particular area we'd like to focus on is the differences in responsibilities and relationships with festival season. So for many, it's about leaving home and going off to work at a festival, and then coming home and working at another festival, or even going to festival and then not come back for long periods of time. So when working at a festival, the main responsibility for artists, for crew, anyone working at the festival is the multiple work roles. And we say multiple because it's never one work role when we're at a festival, but that tends to be the main responsibility. All the different work roles, any other responsibilities are put on the back burner. And in terms of relationships, we can form new friends, we can have new partners, we form a festival family, we form relationships with audiences. There's many people we interact with when working at a festival. And again, some of these relationships can be quite short term. They can be sort of, even for a few minutes, but the relationships there are very different. They're not usually people who are back home. When we return home, we then find that we have to readjust and go back into our everyday responsibilities. These can be family responsibilities. So this can be being parent to children. It can be looking after parents. It can just be generally family responsibilities. Caring responsibilities are linked to that. For some maybe even carers upon returning home. Domestic responsibilities. Again, one of the slight differences with festival season is there's less sort of emphasis on worrying about cooking your own food, cleaning your own areas. When you return home, you suddenly have a home to be responsible for. Social responsibilities, so how we're known in our communities. And again, this may differ. We may actually have particular roles in our communities upon returning home. And cultural, particularly for some people who are from particular religions, where they've got more of a cultural responsibility, and then other jobs. For some people working in the festival season, they go back to other jobs post-festival season. So suddenly you can see there's different responsibilities and more responsibilities, and that actually going from festival season back home, there's a lot of adjustment with that. And this also occurs with relationships. Now, we know working festival season can at times strain relationships with partners. It can strain relationships with children and with parents. It can make friendships a lot more difficult and even cause a sense of isolation or sort of alienation from our own communities. So when we return home, again, there's the readjustment in terms of relationships, of building back up our relationships with our partner, building back up with our children. It can be very difficult. For a lot of people, it can be quite healthy and there's understanding there, but it is a very difficult time of readjustment. And it is mentioned in some areas of research about people who work in festival season sometimes won't go home straight away because they have a couple of days just to have that readjustment, to kind of have that reflection of festival season before they have to go back into their everyday responsibilities and everyday relationships. So in terms of peer support, and this is the important thing, we know working at festival season that we have support from our colleagues, support from our peers. And mind-defined peer support is when people use their own experience to help each other. So when working at a festival, there can be that camaraderie and also support on one another. But then when that's lost, that can be very difficult because we can still talk online, there can be WhatsApp groups, can be video calls. But if geographically there's a distance, that could be a lot more difficult to gain. So some research by Lucy Heyman suggested that one of the expectations of support within the music industry is peer-to-peer support. And actually that industry peers are an example of effective support. And that's because of shared understanding in terms of unique stresses within the music industry, in times shared experiences, because we know working in the music industry, it can be very difficult for people outside the industry to really understand the difficulties of what is going on. So in terms of the program, we offer two elements. So in terms of support, we have our peer support groups. And here this diagram shows how peer support helps one another in the moment. So we have 12 participants supporting one another when talking about their experiences, talking about festival season, offering that mutual support. But what's sometimes not considered is actually the importance as well of training. So we offer mental health first aid and suicide first aid training. And this is another key example of peer support, even though peer support is not in the title of these. So when an individual goes and does mental health first aid, suicide first aid, they then go in to their jobs, they then work with their colleagues and actually are able to offer that peer support when colleagues are experiencing poor mental health. So it's really important during this time of post-festival season that we consider both attending a peer support group and also consider training to be able to lend peer support at a time of need, because our colleagues who've just come back from festival season may be experiencing the same difficulties with post-festival season. So to be offered that support in a more stronger way, training is really important.
Okay, let's look now at some other ways that you can maintain your own well-being. So as mentioned with peer support, this fits in nicely to that. But if you are struggling, to reach out to someone you trust and let them know what's going on. And if you are experiencing poor mental health, we may actually feel that we want to isolate ourselves, but that's actually makes things worse. So it's important to stay connected. Self-care. So think about addressing self-care needs, and that will include your emotional needs. So setting healthy boundaries and practicing self-compassion, and also physical needs such as exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And self-care sometimes can fall to the bottom of our priority list, but it is very important to practice self-care to build up emotional resilience. And there's some helplines that you can call, so Samaritans and Music Minds Matter. And if you do feel like you require some additional support, you should always visit your GP. And you can talk about options for treatment with them, which may include therapy, counselling, and/or medication. And it's really important that we take care of ourselves, but we also want to be looking out for each other as well. So if you are worried about somebody else, opening up a conversation with them and let them know what it is that you are concerned about. And it might be that person might not be ready to talk there and then, but what you can do is let them know that you are available to speak to when they do feel ready. And you want to listen to what that person has to say, truly listen, and give them space to speak without interrupting them. And you want to listen from a state of empathy so that you are truly hearing and understanding what that person is experiencing. You want to avoid making any judgments or assumptions about them or of their situation. And you can always check your understanding of what has been said to you by asking appropriate questions and summarising any facts or feelings. After the initial conversation, you can continue to provide emotional support, or if appropriate, you might even want to offer with anything practical, so practical support, depending on your relationship with that person too. Ask them about their current support network, so who else is within their support network that they can speak to and who can offer them comfort and support. You may need to encourage a person to seek appropriate help, such as making a GP appointment, or you might suggest some other appropriate services that they may find helpful for their unique situation. And if you are ever worried about somebody's safety, or if someone has harmed themselves and they need urgent medical attention, or they're at risk of harm, you want to stay with them and call 999 or help to get them to A&E. And some other really important points to remember is that you want to check in with them again to see how it is that they're getting on. And when you're supporting someone else, you need to think about taking care of your own mental health too. And you may want to consider accessing mental health training. So this will help you better recognise the signs and symptoms of poor mental health and how to support someone correctly who is experiencing a mental health issue.
So in terms of the programme, as mentioned, we offer many elements that can be really useful in terms of post-festival season. So we offer peer support groups. We've got one final peer support group starting the 23rd of October for anyone working in the music industry. And these are online 90-minute sessions that are across 6 weeks. They're facilitated by psychotherapists and counsellors from the music industry. So Adam Fycheck facilitates our open groups, and they're funded by Help Musicians. And they are a real opportunity in post-festival season to be able to talk to others about your experiences, difficulties working in festival season, and also how you're currently feeling in a safe and supportive space. And for anyone who's attended one of our peer support groups, we now offer a weekly drop-in group. So once you've done one peer support group, you can attend weekly sessions for up to a year, where it's the same kind of setup, but a weekly session with the same participants. And these have been going on now since spring, which has been really good. So they've been new for 2023. And in terms of training, as mentioned, we offer mental health first aid, which is online over 4 days, and that's facilitated or instructed by Jade, who's a qualified mental health first aid instructor. And again, this is for anyone working in the music industry. Spaces are really filling up for our final course of the year on the 13th of November. In fact, I think they are all filled up now. But worth checking all the same. And then we also offer suicide first aid light training, which is tutored by Jade as well. Our next course, final course of the year, is the 27th of November. There are spaces. And again, it's an opportunity to learn the skills to support someone who's experienced a crisis in terms of suicide. So learning those suicide intervention skills. And this is a really important element of peer support. It's about looking at it as two areas. Support for yourself, so by going onto a peer support group and receiving your own peer support, and then also attending training to be able to offer peer support for yourself and others working in the music industry, which is in a really important time. Alongside this, we also do offer a range of resources on our website. So this includes free to download mental health scenes specifically for the music industry, which include grounding techniques and self-soothing exercises. And here you can see a range of what we offer: anxiety, psychosis, managing anger as examples. And then, yeah, that brings us to the ends of our slides. And this is our website, tonicmusic.co.uk. You'll also find us on all social media sites under Tonic Music MH. So please do visit us. And I think it's really important that if you are based in the UK, please do consider registering for the programme. It's free to register. The peer support groups are free to attend. And the training courses for all participants are at least half price, alongside free places for those who require them. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jeordie and Jade. That was really insightful. I actually did my mental health first aid training in August, and I cannot recommend it enough. It was really quite incredible, and really kind of gave me a lot of tools actually for helping others moving forward. So yes, so do check out that if you are interested. And we've got about 15 minutes if anyone has any questions for Jeordie and Jade. Either put them in the chat or raise your hand. We've got plenty of time if anyone wants to ask anything.
Could I kick off, Gabby, while others maybe are thinking of their questions?
Please do.
Thank you, Jeordie and Jade. That was excellent as ever. Really, really great to support your work. 2 questions. One, you mentioned that you were at a number of festivals over the summer. Can you give us an indication of the sort of things people were coming to you to talk about and ask about?
Yeah.
And then the second question, this came up in our live venues group just a week or so back, where we were talking about this talk, and some of particularly the arena operators pointed out that it might be post-festival season, but a lot of those workers are immediately going into the busy season for venues and for touring. So, there's no respite. They're jumping straight in to another very busy, very atypical environment. What advice would you give to people who have jumped from the festival season into that sort of touring world? So
Absolutely.
there you go. 2 questions for you.
Really good question, actually, with both of us. So in terms of people coming over to the stand, we're having a range of things. So we're quite fortunate we're able to talk to artists, crew, people working at festivals. We even talk to security and catering staff as well, because we're all part of that ecosystem. Many things occur. So for artists, it can be a case of, a tour, being on a tour bus, another event, sometimes not exactly knowing that sort of the time and day difference as well. And talking about sort of the daily stresses, and it's an interesting one. One of the things that comes up a lot is we hear a lot about people saying, I know I should be really excited and feel really happy that I get to do this amazing job working at festivals, but it's very stressful, it's very high workload, and the high workload is really important to consider. I don't think there's anyone who works at festivals who's not got a high workload. It is that 24/7 culture. It is that real quick, fast-paced work as well. A lot of changeover, things always going on. And we tend to get a lot of people talk to us later in the day when it's a lot more, there's more difficult things spoken about. And highlighting as well, sort of being able to access services while they're in such an intense working environment. Now, fortunately for us, our program is online, so it doesn't require being at a particular location. So that's one of the benefits of what we offer. But it can be difficult because, there are other aspects like Music Mind Matters helpline, but it can be really difficult in terms of speaking to a GP or speaking to a full medical professional. It can be a really difficult time to do that. And that's why a lot of people in the industry aren't always registered with a GP. And that can be a very difficult time. In terms of the arena, you are 100% right. And I think one of the things to consider, and something that's maybe not considered enough, is yes, people do go from festival season to arena season. But one of the key things is kind of that seasonal change. And we know a lot about seasonal affective disorder in the general public. What we don't talk about enough is seasonal affective disorder in the music industry, because actually it's probably a lot worse. And actually the symptoms are probably a lot more severe. So when working at festival season, when the British summer particularly is playing nicely and nice, warm, sunny weather, you're outside, you're in the sun, naturally it's a lot more of a positive environment. If you go from that weeks of working outside, having the sun, to then suddenly be in an arena where it's dark and it's a lot more sort of, you know, can be more, a little bit more of a claustrophobic environment in terms, because it's inside a building. That's a real big change as well. So that is something to consider, not just about the impact of post-festival season and the adjustment of being at home, but when also those go straight out to arena season, that adjustment, that is quite a seasonal adjustment. It's almost like an events industry specific seasonal affective disorder. And I think that's something really to consider, and something we should talk about a lot more and look into maybe researching and finding out what can we do. SAD lamps, for example, might be quite useful for workers going straight into arena season.
Great perspective. Hadn't considered that, but makes total sense. So thanks.